tell us something about your critical roles and responsibilities as a strategic consultant at ET Kearney?
Yeah, sure. So I think like any strategy consulting role, I think the main kind of issues that we solve are, the key CXO problems that they see in the day-to-day business. So, let me give examples. So, for example, a company is sort of struggling with a decline in revenue in a particular geography. So, the COO or the CEO would basically hire a consulting firm, and they would ask us to first identify why they are seeing a decline in revenue. Whether is it, a price-driven mechanism, is it a volume-driven mechanism, or is it something completely different? Which they need to improve on. And then obviously, just the way consulting is structured, you obviously try to identify the issue and then also suggest recommendations on how they can navigate that. So the other issue could be a company is looking to make an acquisition. So they are looking at an inorganic path, and they would be like, what are some of the ways in which we can look at it? Should we do a joint venture? Should we do a complete acquisition, or should we invest at the start for a percentage and then expand it further? Or it could be completely greenfield, right, where they set up their own operations if they don't want to go the M&A route. So these are, the kind of problems that typically I have seen as a consultant in my tenure with Deloitte, as well as with recently with ATK. So I think that is the core issue when you ask about roles and responsibilities. The other thing I would highlight is this is more the client-facing role and responsibility, right? Because you are doing these engagements, whether it's a 2-month engagement or include implementation, so it would go to 6 to 8 months or a year. But there is also an internal aspect within the firm where we have roles and responsibilities of, one is the client engagement, where you're dealing with partners or associate partners and engagement managers on a day-to-day basis to sort of build that case, right? To build the problem solving of that particular issue at hand and present it, whether it's PowerPoint style or nowadays, there are different kinds of ways to present data as well, right? So that is also a part of the roles and responsibilities. Storyboarding is a big part. How are you going to tell the story to the client executives? And also, I would touch upon firm initiatives as the third piece, right? So building things for the firm, right? So like POVs, right? Latest industry trends, materials out there, which we do research on. So that's a big part. Recruitment is a big part as well, because it's a people's business, right? Like people is all that we have in consulting. So those are another set of responsibilities as well. But yeah, I mean, I would say 80-90% of time is focused on client engagements at my level. Yeah.
Can you walk us through a day in your life as a strategic consultant?
Yeah, sure. So things have changed a lot pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. So I'll give a flavor of both. I think let's start with the good part, right? With pre-pandemic. So there was a lot of travel involved when you were at the client side. So I remember, like, there was one project where for 1 month I was in the US because my clients were based out of there, and you were doing the usual Monday to Thursday routine, right? Monday you fly into the client site, you have back-to-back meetings. So typically Monday is the day where you go, the team comes together. It's a team room environment. You have your associate partner or engagement manager, as well as all the consultants on the team, and they would brainstorm on what activities or what problem solving steps you have to take in the next 2 3 days. And then obviously, since you're at the client side, you would have these back-to-back meetings, right? Like with the sales managers, with the R&D managers, with the operations managers. So that takes up like a lot of your Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, and then Thursday you sort of wrap it up. Typically, Fridays were more for firm initiatives and doing stuff on the project for next week, and providing an update to the partner as well. So that he can have that conversation if let's say a CXO calls him up on a Friday to see the status. So that was pre-pandemic when travel was a thing. I think recently, even with Kearney, I've recently joined, right? So we are still operating in the same mindset of having those meetings, but it's all virtual. So you don't have that travel pressure of a 5 a.m. Monday morning, 6 a.m. Monday morning flight. But yeah, I mean, things are still going on pretty much that way. You still have the team room environment virtually, where everyone's sort of problem solves together. But yeah, the travel component has sort of been taken out, so you don't have the Monday Friday travel hustle anymore. But I think apart from that, the hours are the same. The working style is pretty much the same virtually as well. I feel it's slightly tough because you're communicating on Zoom, right? So you don't have the whiteboarding facility that you typically used to have when you were in office or at the client side. So that I think also has played a major role. But yeah, hopefully in a few months time things return back to normal. But that's how usually it has been. And a lot of clients are not also going to be very open to having lot of consultants on site, right, with all this. So things have gotten more virtual, so we might not have the Monday Friday routine. You might have a hybrid model, right, going forward, where 2 or 3 days you are at the client side, but then the remaining 2 or 3 days you might be working from home. So depends on how things will evolve.
What does a career path in consulting look like?
Yeah, so this is interesting. So let me give you examples here, right? So typically the career path within consulting, and I'm talking specifically on strategy consulting, right? Like the 7 to 8 firms. So McKinsey, BCG, Bain, obviously, the top tier firms generally would hire like junior associate on campus, B school campus, and then you move to associate, engagement manager, associate partner, partner. So 5 levels pretty much. BCG also has a similar structure, but then they have different designation. So they might call it senior associate to consultant to PL, to principal and then partner. And typically earlier it was, I would say, a 10-year path to partnership, right? Like from campus, it would take about 8 to 10 years. Like really high performers would even get there in 8 to 9 years, and then 10 years was sort of average. I think right now, because the market has grown so much, consulting has expanded, things are getting tougher, right? Like path to partnership could be looked at 10 to 11 years. And also there are different firms, right? Like at Deloitte, also we had similar levels, right? You join at consultant, then senior consultant, engagement manager, senior manager, and partner or MD. But then because there are so many people, it might take more than 10 years in some cases as well. So it really depends on how small or how niche the firm is, and also how much it is growing, right? So some of the firms which have been growing a lot, like BCG, for example, has seen more of these growth trajectories. But typically, it's a 5 level or 6 level play in India, and then yeah, 10 to 12 years is what I have seen. But yeah, things are pretty dynamic within the industry. So that's sort of the path in consulting. This is the internal path, and obviously you might have heard, right? A lot of folks look at consulting as a 4-year spring pad or launch pad, and then exit into corporate strategy or product roles, which are right now a big uh, space as well, or PNL management or category management roles. So exits are obviously also pretty open in consulting, but specifically in consulting, this is the path that I've seen.
Okay, that's great. So, what are the common attributes and skills for a consultant to excel and advance in the field of like strategic and management consulting?
Yeah, so I think two parts, right? Let me start with saying what are the skills that I found useful and attributes when I started off, right? And then obviously I'm still early in the tenure, so I have a fair idea of how it looks when you advance, but I'll keep that minimal given my experience and role. But at the start, I think three things come to my mind. I think problem solving, structure, and leadership are like three very key attributes in any consulting role. The reason I say that is problem solving, right? So the problems you deal with as a consultant are very ambiguous in nature, right? The client generally won't have a very defined mindset that, I know what is happening, and that is why they would not hire someone. So they would be like, it would be very vague. There would be a lot of uncertainty. So solving problems, whether it is using data, whether it is using certain kind of frameworks and business frameworks that we learn at B school, or just having a knack of solving these complex problems is really really important. uh, the second thing I would say is structure, right? So uh, for example, when a client would say that I want to grow my top line by 2x in the next 4 years, right? So that's like a very broad problem statement. Like you can go in multiple directions. So I think having a structure in mind, like how do you get down to what is going to work, right? And what is going to be really something that the client would like to implement as part of their strategy, is something where structure comes into play. So breaking the problem down into smaller pieces, so that you can actually get to that particular answer. That's where structure comes in. And third, I would say leadership. I think just because consulting has a form of team, right? Like we are a pretty lean team. Like one case or one project would have max 5 to 6 people. Sometimes these projects are large, but like at least in my experience with Deloitte and M&A and recently with Kearney as well, you don't have like large teams, right? 5 or 6 people. You are sort of the only person and maybe a couple of analysts or consultants below, and then like an engagement manager and partner. So you are sort of taking the lead, right? Like on I remember on one of the projects last year, I was directly talking to the private equity vice president or the head for that particular deal. So you are given that exposure, and that is why you also have to have that leadership skill of stepping up, taking more ownership. I think that's really critical. So these three things are definitely important attributes. I think whatever little I have seen in terms of advancement, right? When you say about advancing into consulting, I think owning your career is really important. A lot of these firms are very entrepreneurial in nature. Like if you feel you are passionate about sports as a sector, and there isn't a lot of sports consulting that takes place right now, maybe that's something you can explore and venture into and build a practice around. If you have 3 or 4 like-minded people, that's one thing. And then obviously at the top, like what we see partners and associate partners do, it's mainly selling, right? So having those relationships with CXOs, having good cordial relationships with different folks at the client side is really important, because ultimately you got to sell projects and manage the P&L that you own. So I don't have a lot of visibility into that, but that's what it seems like, right? Like as you progress, you got to have that kind of skill as well. But at the start, I think these skills are really important. And one thing I forgot at the start is storyboarding. So all analysis put together is great, but if you can't present it in the 30-minute session that you have with the CXO, it's not going to be a lot of value add to the client and to your project team as well. So storyboarding and presenting it in a more crisp manner, I think, is another skill that I think is really critical.
Okay, got it. So, what sort of work experience, or knowledge base should a candidate have to be well suited for a consulting role?
Yeah, I think the main thing, I'll speak from my experience. I think business analytics experience helped me a bit. I think having a strong grasp of understanding data, understanding what kind of analysis or what kind of insight this particular information generates, I think was really helpful. The other thing is it could be helpful if you are already in a service-based organization, right? So let's say you are doing in the big fours, you are already into risk advisory or financial advisory, where you have a client, you have a team structure which is similar, right, to consulting. That also helps because you understand, okay, it's a service based model. I need to provide expertise to the client, right? So that helps. But mostly I would say, and that is why you see that it's not usual, right, in B school, where someone who comes in with this experience is hired into strategy consulting. They are open to hiring across. Uh, because I think what they are looking at is, can he or she solve the problem at hand? Like, how is the problem solving skill of that candidate? Does it click to the person when they are provided 3 or 4 different options, and are they using the right structure to break down the particular problem? So I think having similar work experience in consulting or in a service based organization or business analytics is helpful, but that is not the only sort of criteria, because they are looking for people who they can mold, right, in these consulting organizations. So I think problem solving experience is a must. Like if you are able to solve problems, I think you will be really successful. Thinking on your feet is another thing, right? Because
Yeah.
you are in the meeting, you might not have done the entire analysis completely, but can you answer that question and then get back to the client CXO? So that I think having a good knack of storyboarding also. So those are like some of the core skills, and there isn't like a one way answer that this work X provides an entry into it. But yeah, I feel business analytics helps. Service based organization definitely helps. And if you're a strong problem solver, then uh, you know you should be definitely successful.
Okay, got it, got it. What would be the pros and cons of being a consultant?
Yeah, so pros and cons. I think let me start with the good stuff, right? So Pros, definitely, I think the main thing for me was exposure to, high level executives at a very early age, right? So I joined Deloitte after B school, and immediately in one of the first projects, you're presenting to like the CFO of a small company, whether it's a mid-size or a Fortune 500, obviously also makes a difference. But just the opportunity to present to a high-level client executives, or even being part of those meetings where you get to learn a lot, I think that's like a very big thing. I think the learning curve is very steep because you are having conversations with people in the industry who are 20-25 years into that industry, and you are like a fresher. So for you the learning curve is steep because you at least have to get smart about that space, like uh, so that's definitely there. I think the other thing that works really well is exposure to diverse industries, right? So I have worked across food and beverage, batteries, software, industrial goods in terms of filtration products, private equity, as I was mentioning, aerospace. So just the fact that at the young age you are getting exposed to like 8 to 10 different industries adds a lot to your knowledge base. It also helps you choose, right? I'm really passionate about this industry, so you might want to go there. Obviously there is the angle of good pay. It's definitely good pay. You have the exits, as I was saying, and then pre-COVID we all loved the travel part of it also, right? Like uh, where I got an opportunity to travel more globally, but even in India, like the fact that you get to travel and having global stints is always helpful. The bad part, the cons, I think I will address it, that work life balance is definitely something that people are concerned about, and rightfully so. And recently there has been a trend, right, where certain product roles and startup roles, because of the funding that we are seeing, are able to pay equivalent amounts at times to consulting salaries with hope. I don't know, I have not worked in that space, but it seems that the work life balance might be easier, but I don't know if that is true enough. But work life balance is definitely a very big discussed topic in all consulting firms. So that's definitely one thing. And I think what I was saying earlier, right, one point that is emerging right now is what is the skill that you're building in consulting, because it's a very generalist kind of role, right? You are tapping different industries, you're jumping from one project to another. So one might argue that you are not really building a particular kind of skill, let's say product management in a tech role, right, where you need certain kind of technical skills, or maybe operations, right, where you're building that one particular skill. Here it is more like multiple hats, right? You are wearing multiple hats. So maybe that's another argument that people would make, that consulting doesn't provide. But yeah, apart from that, I don't think there are other cons.